Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Paris Henriksen Show. Today we have my wonderful friend, Dalaina May. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for letting me come. I'm excited to chat.
Awesome. So I love to kind of just start off by letting the guest introduce themselves. And then, we just kind of flow from there.
Sounds good. My name is Dalaina May, and I am currently the executive director of Dark Bali, which is an anti-trafficking organization out of Indonesia, actually. And it's a coalition, which basically means that we're supporting about 60 organizations around the country, just trying to help them with being able to do what they do even better and more efficiently. And crazy road to get to that point. But I have an American passport. I'm not really sure my heart is very American because I've mostly lived overseas on like 3 continents, 5 countries. So I feel like I'm a little bit more belong to the globe rather than one specific place. But yeah.
I love that. I love that you said that because I feel like I'm quite similar in that way as well. Obviously, you know a little bit of my backstory and I know a little bit of yours. And I think that that was one thing, like when we initially connected, because we connected for my audience that doesn't know, most of you know that I was kind of involved in the Sound of Freedom release. And that led me to looking for more organizations that we could help with or make films about. And my audience know that my heart is pretty much in Indonesia 24/7. Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of how we connected because I was looking for organizations in Bali specifically. And so I think it's just been like a gradual kind of flow and connection, which is really nice. So I guess talk to us a little bit about how that process started and kind of what it was that led you to starting Dark Bali.
Sure. I mean, honestly, it goes way back for me. When I was a kid, I was growing up in Honduras, Central America, and anything about Honduras, it's had a lot of struggles, a lot of violence, a lot of gang violence. And so I was exposed to a lot of that. I think my parents' passports and position in the community kept me safe, but a lot of my girlfriends were experiencing a lot of gender-based violence. So, as a teenager, I was watching my friends be, assaulted and trafficked, some of them. And so I didn't really know what it was. I just knew it was bad. And then as I got older and was kind of figuring out what it was that I felt like I was supposed to do, like what was my mark in this world, I was in a writing group and met a woman who ran an anti-trafficking organization. And all of a sudden I had language for what I had seen as a kid. Oh, that's what that was. And so I ended up just jumping into grad school to get a degree that would support doing something about this thing. And for me, because my heart has always been really overseas, I knew I wanted to work more in an international space than just, staying in the US. And so I worked in the US briefly, but I ended up being invited to work with a little tiny nonprofit in Indonesia, in Bali, that was setting up a safe house for trafficked girls and just helping them with their staff development and just kind of getting things off the ground. And in the context of that, getting to know them and other organizations in Bali, I realized, there's such a lack of resources here. I'd worked in California for a while and people would complain about the social nets and resources in the United States. But I'm like, if we had a fraction of this, it would change everything. And so talked with my colleagues in these different organizations, and together we basically started meeting monthly and saying let's do something together. We can work better together. We can share resources. We can help each other out with our projects. And then pretty soon the police started joining the task forces, legal aid, social services, other organizations that were getting started and kind of on the periphery, doing different things with prevention and things like that. And so it was really organic, kind of fell into it. And it was basically a system where they would be like, okay, well, we need this resource, or we're looking for this kind of infrastructure to develop. And I'd be like, okay, go, And so I would look for that and try to figure out how they could get what they needed. Do we need to develop something new because it doesn't exist? Or do we need to translate something that somebody else has done somewhere else? How do we make connections? And did, especially in the early days, but even still did a lot of training, capacity building training, stuff like training on trauma-informed care, and things like that. And within a couple of years had organizations from other parts of Indonesia like, hey, what about us? Like, we want to join these things. And so we're like, well, it doesn't make sense to leave this just in Bali because of the nature of trafficking. It's all over. There's as much domestic trafficking within Indonesia as there is international. So we opened the doors and said, okay, like, let's open this coalition and make it national. So now we've kind of been going back and organizing task forces where we have like clusters of organizations. So like Jakarta, we have one in Lombok, Bandung, and just trying to help them really be able to focus on what's happening in their very local context, but then having them connected to the wider national community so that we can also do stuff together. So yeah, it's been really cool. It's grown really naturally and shockingly fast. We started in 2015, registered in 2018, and with 3 organizations, and now we're like up over 60. So I think people have just a hunger to be able to do what they do well. They're here because they care. And if you're, to have connection with people who get the difficulties of the sector, to be able to access resources is pretty invaluable. So it's not a hard sell, when people hear about us, they're like pretty interested most of the time. So
Yeah, I love that because I think you and I know the culture of Bali, especially, and we know that even the government is not as straight laced as it could be. Kind of, I guess, how did you guys navigate, like in the beginning, in the early stages, how did you guys navigate that? Because obviously, you and I have talked off camera about some of the different challenges, and we don't need to go into all of it, but just briefly, kind of, how did you navigate that?
yeah, it's a really good question. Indonesia is a collection of islands, and the way that Indonesia became a country was islands were added into the country, gradually. And so there's kind of different charters almost that different islands will have agreements they have with the federal government. And it makes it feel almost like you're working with multiple countries, when you're going from region to region. And so what's true in one place is not always true in the other. Like, we have partners that work in areas of Indonesia where the police are the problem, where they are very corrupt, where they are trafficking people, where they are, buyers of sex, like causing a lot of the issues. And then we have places where the police are like doing the thing and they are amazing partners and doing exactly what they're mandated to do. And I mean, it's a huge spectrum. I think in terms of just the strategy that we adopted pretty early, I know there are some that will like do the whole naming and shaming thing, but that never really felt good for us. I don't think it's very culturally acceptable. I think, Indonesia as a Asian country, authority is really important and honor is really important. And so it didn't fit anyway, but I also don't think it's as effective. And I looked into a little bit. International Justice Mission is a really cool organization. And the man that started that organization wrote a book called The Locust Effect. And I read it and it really resonated for me, especially having grown up in a very corrupt place as well in Honduras, where, police brutality was just like every day. And what he talked about was when they'd gone into these different communities to work in anti-trafficking and try to develop law enforcement, what they found was about 15% of people, of officers, would be just corrupt. They were corrupt, they were dirty, there was nothing you could do about that. And then 15% were ethical and they would not compromise that. Like, they were going to do the right thing no matter what it cost. But the 70% in the middle really just swung wherever the power was. And so they would go into community and it feel like 80%, 85% of people were just corrupt. But if they would really help empower that positive 15%, build their power, build their voice, really make them shine, at some point that 70% would just flip flop. And all of a sudden this 70% would really get on board with the other 15 because that's the most expedient thing for them. And so I think we've kind of adopted that attitude as well. Like, yes, there's corruption and, are there circumstances where we would need to make a report or, something? Sure. But for the most part, what we're looking for is who are the people in authority that are doing a good job, who really care about this issue, who are trying to, follow the laws and build more robust policies, and let's get behind them and put gas in their tanks so that they can go further. And so that's kind of been more where we've landed. Yeah, I think, It can be more challenging in some places than the other, but I think there's good people everywhere. Sometimes you just have to look for them.
Yeah, I mean, and what you were talking about before in terms of, police brutality and all of that stuff, it's happening right in our backyards here in the US. So it's like when you're talking about those numbers, it's like, even, and for most of them that don't know, Bali was considered a third world country, and I think it still is. Is that correct? Or is kind
Pretty
of,
developed at this point. I mean, Indonesia's so diverse, so I think there are definitely islands in Indonesia that are very much still developing, and there's a lot more poverty. But Bali itself has built up quite a bit because of the economy.
right, yeah. So, and I think, but even with here, it's like, the same stuff's happening in our own backyard. And I
Oh yeah.
think those numbers, and this is a country that is supposed to be so established and so this and so that and all these different things and so political. But it's like the numbers that you talk about, I'm sure it's very similar here in the US in terms of flip flopping and like that with 70%.
I think it's a strategy that would work not just for like anti-trafficking work. I think just like in general, yeah, it's a pretty good strategy.
Yeah, no, I like that. So, what are, I guess, for my audience and we've had people on before who have talked about anti trafficking, and, most of them have heard me talk out the ear about Sound of Freedom, and all these other things, because it's something that I'm very passionate about as well. What are some signs to, I guess, look for? And maybe if you can kind of explain the different types of trafficking, because I think a lot of people just kind of think, okay, child trafficking, but they don't realize there's labor trafficking and all of these other things. And obviously, in Asian countries, labor trafficking can also be a big thing. So if you can kind of talk to that a little bit and kind of give us.
Yeah, of course. And and I worked in the US for a while, and I can say there are really big differences. There are differences between like who's getting targeted. There are differences, yeah, some things that are really specific to different places. Even outside of Indonesia or the US, there are places where they like India's got a really interesting cultural with the caste system, and so there's things that happen there that don't really happen elsewhere. But in terms of Indonesia, I feel like we have the whole spectrum of human trafficking. And if you look at the definition, I mean, trafficking is basically like what is happening. You're being moved, you're being harbored, whatever. And then it is for the purpose of what? For the purpose of exploitation, for the purpose, whether it's sex or your labor, somebody's exploiting you, and they're doing it without your consent through force, fraud, or coercion. So, sex trafficking gets a lot of airtime because I don't know, like it just violates something within us so deeply to know about that, and especially when it happens to children. But it's not the most common type of trafficking, not by a mile, not anywhere. We definitely have sex trafficking and child sex trafficking in Indonesia, particularly in places like Bali where there's a lot of tourism, a lot of sex tourism. Batam is another place. It's right south of Singapore, and it like the population like quadruples every weekend because they get all these Singaporeans and Japanese and Koreans, like people coming in to like shop, and sex tourism is really big there. So we have a lot of kids that get trafficked there, Jakarta. But we also have a lot of trafficking that's labor trafficking. And this can look like a lot of things. So the fishing industry, lots of fishing in Indonesia. Obviously, we're in the ocean, and we have people that get put on vessels and not paid, and they're stuck there and they can't leave. Just literally blatant, obvious slavery. Different kind of fields like palm oil, agricultural things, chocolate, coffee, those are always kind of named. Definitely happening all over the place. And then we have a lot of migration for jobs. It's very common in Indonesia for somebody to go to a new island for a job or to leave the country for a job. And so there are quite a few people who will make their way to another country for a job. And sometimes it's a legitimate job, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes they get there and work for a while, and then all of a sudden they're in a bad situation. And sometimes they get there thinking they're going to a good thing and immediately are in a bad situation. So it could be that they're house workers, like domestic servants. That's a really common one, especially going to places like Hong Kong or Singapore or the Middle East. A lot of people will migrate to Malaysia to work in a factory, but they're not getting paid wages, or they're being abused or being exploited some way. And because they're overseas, they're stuck, they're afraid, they might not have their documentation. And then another thing that's come up in the last about year and a half is online scamming. So this is like a really weird and new form of trafficking. So these are the people who like call you and like try to scam you on the phone, and get mad at them, hang up on them. But what we're realizing is a lot of those people that are making the calls are actually trafficking victims. And so, and this is happening in huge numbers in Asia. And we have a lot of documentation of Indonesians included being recruited, usually college graduates, which is weird. That's not been the normal one.
Yeah.
They're educated, they have some technology skill, they're looking for their first job, and they get recruited to go to Cambodia or to Myanmar to work for, something. But when they get there, they're taken to this really remote location. It's like a compound. There's nobody else around, and often their documents are taken, and then they're told, okay, you have a quota for calls, you have to do this, and we're paying you, but basically all the money that you get paid, you have to pay us back in your room and board, because there's nowhere else to live but right here. So it's just, they're basically being scammed themselves. And they've rescued, like, in the numbers of like 1,000, 2,000 victims at a time when they've taken, when they've rented these compounds. And so that's been a really interesting development in our sector in the last year and a half, and like doing some research, trying to get our heads around it, trying to prepare people, because a lot of the prevention in the past has been really focused on the poor and people that are not educated, and trying to equip them with the knowledge that they need to make safe choices. But all of a sudden we're like, no, we're talking college graduates now, and we're talking older people, we're talking men and women, and like, it looks all legit on the surface. So how do you protect yourself when migrating for jobs is normal, when of course you need to work, like all of these things, and you have the education? How can you get yourself out in those situations? So yeah, that's kind of, I think, the challenge in Indonesia, is because we have everything. So it feels like we kind of have to be working on all these kind of different types of trafficking at the same time. And a lot of people experience multiple kinds of trafficking. They might be exploited for labor, and then in that context, they're also exploited for sex. So it's a big mess.
Yeah, it is. And I think, and this is the one thing that I like to talk to the viewers about, because they always have this perception of like, it doesn't happen in our own backyard. It doesn't happen in America. It only happens in places like Indonesia or Thailand. And I think people think that it's just happening like in all of these places. And people don't really realize to kind of also look in our own backyard. So I guess, what are some of the signs that people can look for with these different types of trafficking? Obviously, labor trafficking can be a little bit different, but what is like a sign, like a regular person like you or I, if we see something, what are the best things to look for?
Yeah, it is different. And I worked in California for a while, and it was really interesting learning some of those differences. Like in the US, especially in terms of sex trafficking, child sex trafficking, the vulnerabilities are especially within the foster system. I know when I was working in Orange County, California, one of the years that our report came out, and this was for the whole county, 100% of the children that were identified as trafficking victims, 100% were involved as foster children or juvenile justice. All of them.
Oh my God.
That's just who gets targeted. And it makes sense, because traffickers are not stupid. It's a business. They're going to do whatever is the smartest, most expedient thing. And if you want to exploit a child or a teenager or a young person, you're going to go after the people who nobody's going to look for, right? Like, you're going to go after the people who can disappear and nobody cares. And that's our foster kids. Like, I don't know if you know, like Amber Alerts, where they're like, hey, kid is taken. Foster kids don't get Amber Alerts. Foster kids disappear. They do not get an Amber Alert.
Oh my God.
And because they disappear all the time, we don't have time for that. And traffickers know that. And so, I think there's like a 48-hour window for a runaway before they often get picked up by somebody that's going to exploit them. And so I think, it's important to look at the vulnerabilities. Like, I would get so irritated because these other moms would be like, oh my God, somebody's going to snatch my kid from Target. I'm like, no, they're not. And you're wasting so much energy freaking out about something that's not really dangerous. And it's interesting that so many of my colleagues who are parents aren't paranoid about their own kids, because they understand the vulnerabilities of the actual victims, right? Yeah. So, look at the kids in your community who are foster kids. How can you support the foster system? Like, that's a better trafficking prevention response than anything else.
I love this, yeah.
So I think definitely looking at people who are vulnerable, people that have substance abuse issues, homeless, kids that are kicked out because they're gay, like, those sorts of things are huge.
Yeah.
In terms of labor trafficking in the US, I mean, there's been a ton of stuff that has come out about our own agricultural sector, where so many migrant workers end up trafficked, and they come on legitimate visas.
Yep.
and things happen, and all of a sudden they're here illegally, and somebody is in control of them, and they're being exploited. Their children are being exploited. Like, we know that minors are being exploited in factories and fields in the United States. We know that, it's documented. And so I think, you know, when you see somebody under the control of somebody else, like, that's a huge sign. And there is a hotline in the US that people can call. And I super recommend, like, if you see something, don't get involved, because you can actually hurt the victim. You can scare the trafficker, and then, you know, they take it out on the victim. But you can call people who have the expertise to get involved and find out. You know, I remember I went to like a massage parlor with a friend of mine. This is like a decade ago or something, in California. And we walked in, like, this place is sketchy. Like, this, there's something really wrong here. Okay, we'll call the hotline. Call, just about any community in the US has a task force now that's dedicated to anti-trafficking. So figure out what your community task force is, call them, make a report. If it feels weird, let them sort it out. You don't have to figure out if it actually is weird. Let somebody else figure it out.
Yeah, and I like that, because I think a lot of people they see something and they want to jump in and help right away, but they don't necessarily realize that the victim is still there with the trafficker, and they're not, like, unless you're physically taking them away from the person, which a lot of times we know is not possible. It's fine. You know, it's something to really look for, because people just kind of, they don't think about that. So we'll definitely put in the show notes as well, the line and everything like that as well, and some of the local lines for some cities, because I know that, you know, obviously there's a lot of areas, and I found this out when I was at the premiere of Sound of Freedom, that Atlanta specifically is one of the worst areas in the United States, along with Ohio and a couple of other areas. And obviously all those areas are connectable, right? So they're so easy to get around and get through. So, you know, we'll put those links as well. But I think that, you know, some people, and what I'm seeing now a lot of the time too, is I'm seeing signs in airports and airport bathrooms and stuff like that. So how do you guys, like, when you guys see stuff like that, how does that kind of like make you guys feel? Or how do you think that, you know?
I think those are great. I think that the United States and other countries have these amazing resources, like hotlines, like ways for victims to signal that they need help, to get help. There are people looking for them and able to help them. There are resources for recovery. I mean, yes, we could use more, but, you know, there are beds, and there are, you know, therapists, and there are job resources, and there are all these social nets in the US, even more so in places in other parts of the world. I see those things, and I'm both delighted and jealous, because Indonesia's not there yet. You know, we're 20 years behind, and there is no hotline. And in a lot of places, the police are not looking. And we've worked in areas where we've brought a videotape of a teenager saying, I'm being trafficked for sex in this place, and I don't want to do this. I don't want to be here. And the police have said, well, unless you can prove that they're a minor, like, you know, whatever, like, we're not going to do anything. Like, and in my head, I'm like, even if this was an adult woman saying, I'm being forced to have sex, like, that's still illegal. That's still not okay. Like, that's still trafficking. And, you know, and our team had to literally go to a different island, find this kid's family, find a birth certificate, bring it back before the police would even act. And that was a good situation. There are we have teams on the ground in different parts of Indonesia who do a lot of work in red light districts, more empowering people to get out themselves, because rescue is not always the best way to do it. In fact, more and more research is showing that, like, the rescue raid model is actually damaging and causes more trauma to the victim. And you can, sometimes it's the only way forward, but sometimes it's not. In Indonesia and the brothels that we spent a lot of time in, a lot of times these women would have contracts, you know, and they were timed contracts. And when they were over, they actually did have the option to leave. It was this weird thing. And, you know, and so helping women make the decision, like, you can leave now, we can help you find something better. A lot of women were so broken by the time their contract ended, they just, like, basically signed back up.
Oh my God.
So they had been coming to work in a hotel, got put into a brothel, you know, so they were definitely trafficked.
Yeah.
But they were told, you can leave in 2 years. But at the end of the 2 years, they were just like, might as well stay. And so really wanting to help empower people to get out themselves. And so we have teams that go into areas and build relationships with the women, let them know, here's where you can go to if you want out.
Okay.
Here's the resources that can help you. Here's where you can go. Like, here's my number, things like that. And so that's really how we're having to get around it in places where law enforcement is not responsive. And it's unfortunate because if you just go in and like grab a victim and pull them out, all you've created is a vacuum where a trafficker is going to now victimize another person to put them there. It works like a business. If somebody steals something off the store shelf, well, the owner's just going to buy the product, put it back on the shelf to resell it. Like, that's how it works. And that's how traffickers work with victims. And so, we don't support, hot rescues. That's not an ethical or effective model. But if we can get people out of their own accord, that's great. And then really, we've been pushing for the last year, this new project that we're working on is training law enforcement so that they understand victim identification. This is really intense week-long training where it's here's human trafficking is, but here's the laws. Like, it goes through Indonesian law and policy. Here's how you are like equipped and mandated to handle this. Here are the agencies that you can work with. Here are the local NGOs in your area that are ready and happy to work with you. And so really wanting to support law enforcement, going back to what I was saying earlier about empowering the good ones, really wanting to see them equipped with what they need so that they can start engaging more. And we've seen some of that. Like, we've seen, people get a little bit of success and they're like, oh, this feels really good. And, our police forces in Indonesia are woefully under-resourced. Like, it's just embarrassing how little money and resources that they have.
Well, I remember you saying they didn't even have, some of them don't even have money for printer paper.
Right. Can you buy some printer paper? And they will come to, in different places, they will come to NGOs and say, well, if you want this victim, if you want this investigation to happen, you need to pay for it. Because we don't have any money left in our budget to pay for this investigation. We've had people in our network who have gone undercover with the police because they needed extra hands because they literally didn't have it, which is a terrible, terrible thing to do.
If you're not trained in that, of course. Dangerous too.
Right. It shouldn't be that way. So I think there's a lot that we can do in Indonesia. And there are places in other parts of the world who are a little bit further along. So we can kind of look at that and see what worked for them, because this wasn't always the case in the US, right? Like, it's had to grow.
Of course not. Yeah.
So, how has Thailand developed this? What can we learn from them? So that's kind of where it's at for us. I think it's such a complicated, multi-layered problem that the only response has to be complicated and multi-layered. It's the only thing that's going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the one thing about Indonesia that I've always kind of prayed on and always wished that they had was law enforcement that were more equipped to handle situations, because not even outside of trafficking, there's a whole issue with, the drug trade and all of that stuff that goes on and how corrupt that is. You and I know this firsthand very well. And I'm sure some of my listeners do as well. So I think that's one thing, but especially with the trafficking that, you're sitting here saying they don't even have resources for printer paper. Well, how are they going to go and, get a victim out down the street from a brothel? Because if they don't have money for that, they're not going to have money for that. And it's heartbreaking that they don't have the resources.
And the cool thing is we're seeing a lot of change. Like, the structure of law enforcement in Indonesia is very different. And for a long time, the responsibility for investigating trafficking cases really lied at the local level in a group that couldn't really do criminal cases, which is kind of weird. But literally this year, the president basically reformed and restructured some stuff so that the federal police, this is the equivalent of the FBI, are now have this task force, and they're national. They can go anywhere. And that's really helpful with the corruption, because a lot of the corruption happens on a very local level, within that community. And so they're kind of above that. And it's nuts, because last year, I think there were 172 arrests for trafficking, which is kind of nuts when we know that we have at least 1.8 million victims every year, and we had 172 arrests. Crazy. But in the last, I think it's been 4 months since they like restructured and equipped the federal police to be in charge of trafficking cases. I think it's almost 3,000 arrests.
Oh my gosh, that's wonderful.
So like we're all going, finally. We've been waiting for like a good breakthrough here. And from what I've been told from, people that have connections with the federal police, like they're just cleaning up open cases. These cases aren't even new things. These are just things that have been sitting on desks that like the low-hanging fruit. So it's a really fun time right now because I feel like, our community is just like, feels like we've been banging our heads against the wall for years and years and years. And all of a sudden, like we're seeing growth and development of like the system as a whole in a really good direction. So it is really encouraging.
That's amazing, amazing. And I think that that's something that we have a project coming up, which we can't talk about, but not yet anyway. But that's some of those things, we explore some of those things that we've been talking about throughout the last 30 minutes in that, in what we're doing. And I think that that's really going to be able to give people a good perspective as well and be able to link them to some of the stuff that we've been discussing as well in terms of not even just law enforcement, but in terms of like day-to-day stuff. What is the different variations of trafficking? Because most people literally just think that it's sex trafficking and they don't think that there's anything else kind of behind that. I guess for Indonesia specifically, for people that live outside of Indonesia, how can people help if they want to help? What is the most effective way?
Yeah, I will die singing the praises of coalitions and networks because they work. We know that they work. It's how, Cambodia has developed a much more robust response. It's how, where you see success is when you see good coalitions and collaboration happening. And that's kind of why we chose when we were getting started to make that our main priority. Like we're developing a coalition. We're going to like sink all of our everythings, all of our resources into developing this. And I think, it makes sense if you do a training for a staff of a safe house on trauma-informed care, you can go do that, spend the money, do the training and leave. But if you go through a coalition, they can invite, 10 other organizations to participate in the exact same training for the exact same cost, And so it's a really effective way to, I hate using business terms like return on your investment, but like that's what it is. So, but it's also notoriously hard to get support for coalitions and networks because it's not sexy work. It's a grunt work. It's building infrastructure, it's building systems, it's challenging policies, it's, making connections with people. So I know like for Dark Bali, we have an impact team that we call it. These are like people that are invested monthly, and it's kind of like a Patreon sort of a situation. It's just like, look, we're going to invest in the people on the front lines and, trusting Dark Bali to distribute that in terms of like training and resources to the community. There's also a link on darkbali.org website. I think it's called Connect or something. And we actually have a page that desperately needs to be updated, but of different organizations who are doing different things. And like, we love connecting people. And so if somebody's like, I really have a heart to, this particular place, or I really have a heart for this particular kind of work. I've taken, I don't even know how many calls and just, ended up just linking people like, oh, what you're talking about is what this organization is doing. You should talk to them. Be a champion for the local grassroots community. The reality is 80% of the funding in our sector goes to like 20% of the people working against trafficking. There's a lot of people out there doing a lot with almost nothing. And so I really encourage people to find the grassroots, the people that don't have the big, slick, fancy websites, but are just like putting all their resources straight to survivors and victims. Find them and get behind them. And it takes a little bit of work. It takes some research, but we've tried to make it a little bit easier for people to find at least, the Indonesian organizations in our network through the website, or even just being open for contacts and, a call or email exchange to connect people.
Okay, I love that. And we'll put everything as well, like in the show notes too. I guess for people that are locally to the US, what is something that they can do within their own community to sort of, because I know a lot of people are like, oh, I don't have money to help, I don't have this to help. What's something that they can do from your opinion, that they can do to kind of help support against trafficking?
I think figure out who you are and what is it that you have, and figure out how to connect it. So like, I think you're a great example. Like, you're a producer. Like, this is my skill set. I'm going to raise awareness through my own skill set, right? Like, I'm going to like invest, like that makes total sense. One of my favorite people in the world is our treasurer, and she donates hours every month to keep all of our books clean and, you know, all the bookkeeping, because she's an accountant. That's what she does.
Yeah.
Like, and so figure out like, what is it that your skill set is, and do that. I have a friend, like, she loves kids, so she volunteers her time for the foster kids who could be trafficked otherwise, right? Like, there's not a one fit. It's really figuring out like, what is it that makes you tick? What do you love? And how can you like utilize that for, you know, anti-trafficking, whether it's locally or it's more of an international thing. And it's, yeah, I mean, funding is super important. We can't get away from that. But there are so many ways that you can volunteer. You know, if you, at the end of the day, if you're on social media, being an advocate for an organization that you love and believe in is invaluable. You know, I spent a lot of time, you know, trying to talk about Dark Bali and like, you know, hey guys, like we're here, we should do this. You know, that's part of my job, my role. But man, when I have a few people that are like, Dark Bali's awesome, let me link you up, you know, I'm gonna like raise money for my birthday on Facebook or what, like that's amazing. And that ends up like being a real like snowball effect and support for an organization. So I think figure out who you are, and then figure out what organization resonates with you, and just be their biggest cheerleader, whether that's volunteering time, giving money, or just being an advocate for the organization and the work that they're doing.
I think that's so powerful, because people just think, a lot of people just think it's like a one thing, like a one thing fits all. And that's a really wonderful perspective, because it's not true. There's so many different ways and so many different things. Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna, and it's all gonna continue to loop in as we continue to chat, but we're gonna lighten it a little bit.
Right.
Some personal questions. What are you grateful for in your life right now?
Oh my goodness. You know what? I was just talking about how grateful I am for so many things with my husband earlier. Today, I am grateful that I reconnected with a friend from when I was a kid, and we're going to like have our first like chat that we've had for 25 years. And I'm really excited about that and really grateful. Um, and I just got back from vacation with my family. I have 4 kids, and it was just like so fun. Like, we just had a good time. My kids are teenagers now, and so it's really different, like traveling with little kids, and that's a whole thing. But like traveling with teenagers and like getting to go on adventures with them and kind of see the experience through their eyes is really cool. So I'm really grateful for that.
I love that. I love that. What is like a typical day for you? What is your morning routine, and how does that kind of fall into what you do at Dark Bali?
I guess a typical day would be similar to today. Got up pretty early and did some journaling. And I think that that's been a really important practice for me to just like get it out. For people in our sector, there's a lot of PTSD, a lot of secondary trauma. And so as I was getting involved with this pretty early on, I started to see symptoms. And so I signed up with a therapist. And so I see somebody regularly, at least once a month. It's almost just like maintenance, you know, because when you hold stories that we hear on a day-to-day basis, it can kind of mess you up. So journaling is an important practice for me. And then I went running yesterday, I did some yoga. So definitely like getting some physical activity and getting the stress out is really important. Drive my kids to school. And then I'm after that, like jumping on the computer, and my day to day is really eclectic. A lot of what I'm doing is supporting our staff in Bali. And, you know, she had a list of things that she needed my help with, just some graphic design and things like that, and administrative stuff, some fundraising stuff. And I'm also really involved with planning the Asia Region Anti-Trafficking Conference this year. It's a committee I've been sitting on for a couple of years. And I'm actually leading that committee for 2024. So we just finished that conference in July, and it was amazing. It moves around every 2 years. And so last year and next year, or this past year and the next year, will be in Bali. So we had one in Bali. It was awesome. And we're doing that again. So they put me in charge of it. So I've really had a lot of fun already, kind of thinking about speakers and like what does the community need to know? What do they need to learn? How can we network? And this is like in the greater Asia region. And then we also do an Indonesian conference as well. And so kind of the same idea, just on a smaller scale. So I didn't really have conference planning on my bingo card for my life. I just kind of fell into it as part of the role, but it's so fun. And like getting to connect with all these like cool people and researchers and practitioners, and putting together a venue and like an experience for people to like really, really learn a lot and enjoy, and building their capacity so they can take it back is super fun. And then I also sit on a leadership team for a global anti-trafficking network. And so my role in that is really focusing on coalitions. And so we have, coalitions in Greece and coalitions in Mexico and coalitions in Indonesia and Australia. And so kind of getting all these coalition leaders and trying to figure out, like, we call ourselves the cat herders because that's kind of what the job feels like, but how do we equip together? And like we were working on basically this document that we can all use for grant raising. Like, how do we communicate the importance of coalitions? What is the research surrounding this? And like, how do we build this out and then share it with one another so nobody has to go reinvent the wheel every time we need to write a grant? So a lot of like projects like that. So I guess I'm a little bit like ADHD in that way. Like, I don't like being stuck doing one thing. So I really like that I kind of get to have my hands in everything. And then at some point I call it a day and make dinner and hang out with my family and just do normal family life stuff. And then I often am on the phone in the evening, sometimes for meetings, but a lot of my friends are all over the world. So it's kind of like, how can I connect with friends? And so kind of, I feel like trying to balance and everything in moderation and not getting too stuck in one thing.
I love that. And how do you deal with the time difference? Because obviously Indonesia is such different time to Eastern time.
So let's see. My last meeting last night started at 11 p.m.
Yeah.
I was supposed to have a 6 a.m. today, but it got canceled and I was really glad. So, I have weird sleeping schedule, and I try to like be thoughtful when I plan out stuff. So if I have a late night that I can sleep in or, whatever, but some days it doesn't work. But if I get tired, like, I have no problem like blacking out a day and being like, I just need to rest today. Like, I can't function if I'm not rested. So, I definitely have weird hours. Often like late evening is their early morning. So it works.
I feel you on that because they're similar to Aussie time. So I'm
Right.
always, and it's worse for me now because I moved to Nashville. So it's like an additional 2 hours. But so I feel you on that, girl. It's kind of crazy with the time differences. And Bali is a whole lot different, or Indonesia in general, because it's back again further, like an extra couple hours. Crazy. What do you believe the key ingredients are to living a meaningful life?
I think gratitude is top for sure. And I try to like incorporate gratitude in just like my everyday thought process, remembering. And that's important, especially when you're staring at a lot of really ugly stuff. I think being open-handed is really important. At least for me, because probably a control freak a little bit. Like type A, get the things done, but like,
you admit that though.
Yeah, it's a thing. It's hard, but learning to like be open-handed. And what I've realized over time is when I am like struggling with something and I'm like stuck up against the wall and I'm like pushing and pushing and it's not moving, it is always a bad idea to keep pushing.
Yeah.
Always. Yep. Like, I don't know, call it the universe, call it God or whatever, but something saying stop, you need to learn to stop and open your hands and let things go. And, sometimes it's just not the right time. Sometimes you didn't have the tools that you needed, like whatever it is. And so whenever I've pushed through something, when there was resistance, I've always regretted it. And so I think learning to be really open-handed and trust that like the things that need to get done will get done. And also it's not all mine to do.
Yeah. I love that perspective.
Like, I'm not supposed to save the world. I'm not got to be the person that ends human trafficking in Indonesia. Like, that's silly in so many ways.
Yeah.
But to really understand, like, I have this small little life and I get to decide what to do with it and, insist that it be meaningful and beautiful. But in order for that to be true, there also has to be balance. And I can't I can't put the world's problems on my shoulders alone. It doesn't mean I can be apathetic and walk away and pretend like there aren't things that like I have the responsibility for, but to ask for help and to look for community. So yeah, I think definitely gratitude, being open-handed, and community would probably be on my top three.
Mm, I think that's so powerful too, because a lot of people think, like to what you just spoke about, not carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders and not thinking that you can do everything. And I think that a lot of people in a position like yours, or a position even like mine of, raising awareness on different topics, they think, like through film, they think that, or rethink that, yeah, we have to do everything. We have to save the world. And for the longest time, I thought that way too. I was like,
Right, same.
and then like 7 years ago, I was like, I'm one person. Like, I can make a huge difference, of course, but not one person's ever changed or saved the world except God. So at the same time, it's like, it's always interesting to kind of see that perspective, but I love that you have that perspective as well.
Yeah. Well, and it's hard fought for, and something I have to circle back around to regularly. My like this, hero complex or something. So yeah, I think in the drive to be meaningful, to not lose your humanity is really important.
Mhm. I love that. It's so powerful. Do you have a favorite place where you like to go that you feel the most grounded?
Oh, dude, I have a chair in one little spot in Bali, and it is my chair. I literally have a picture of this chair in my house. So when we lived in Indonesia and Bali, um, we kind of stumbled on this like little like Balinese owned bungalow on the beach in northern Bali, actually more eastern Bali. But anyway, and it just ended up being our place. And it's like $30 a night or something, to like sit on the beach. And I think, we ended up making like some big like life decisions there. And a lot of Dark Bali was developed just sitting in that chair and thinking. And so I feel the most grounded and connected to the world when I'm there. And I don't have any great explanation for why. It's just like, this is my spot. And so I try to get there at least once a year for like 3 or 4 days. And I literally sit in the chair and do not move for 4 days, except to like sleep and eat. And even then begrudgingly. So that is my favorite place for sure.
I think it's so cool. It's so cool. And I mean, I think Bali just has that effect. Like, it's like, everyone always asks me, like, what is it about Bali? I'm like, I can't tell you. You have
Same.
to go and experience it. And I know
Right.
we talked about this when we first met, of like the same thing.
Yeah.
And I love that you kind of said that about the chair, because I don't have a chair, but I have a particular beach in Bali
Nice.
that I go to, and I'm like, whenever I'm there, it's like things just either click into place, or whatever's meant to click out of place just disappears from my life. And I think that that's, it's so cool to kind of have places like that.
That's exactly right. It's just like a place for clarity.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that your dog just jumped in the back of our screen too. It's so cute. Mine does the same thing often from time to time. I love it. So obviously you just went on family vacation, but aside from Indonesia, what's your favorite place to travel to?
I don't think I have a favorite place to travel to. I think my favorite place to travel to is somewhere new. Like one of my bucket lists is to like visit all the countries in the world. And so like, I also have this goal. My birthday's in May, and I want to be in a different country every year on my birthday, like never in 2 places back to back. And I've almost, except for during COVID, for the last 8 years, I've been in a different country for my birthday every year. So, and there've been some repeats. And like, I remember one year, I'm like, quick, we got to go to Mexico. Quick, let's go. We gotta be somewhere. It's May. So yeah, I love the exploration of travel, and like learning how other people do life, and like what's important to them and what's beautiful here. And yeah, so I'm really looking forward to empty nesting in the next few years and having my kids go off and do their own thing and getting to like poke around the world a little bit more.
Sounds delightful.
Right?
Sounds great. What is, I guess, because you did grow up in a few different areas and different countries and whatnot, for you, what is, I guess, one thing that you took from that you kind of carried through your life in terms of maybe something that you saw or something you experienced that kind of shaped you as who you are today?
One of the things that I struggle a lot with, because I live in the United States right now, we moved back for my husband to go to school. Hopefully, we'll move back to Bali after all of his training.
Yeah.
But one of the things that's really hard for me in the United States is the narrative of the US being the best country. And just like it, it's not.
No, it's not.
And there isn't one. And I think that that's one thing that I took from growing up in different countries was like, everywhere is beautiful and everything has its own differences, and it's a struggle for me to see people so disinterested in knowing what else is out there and understanding different perspectives and other like cultural values, and to see people like threatened by that, because to me, like, it's the beautiful tapestry that is life. Like, this is what makes humanity gorgeous, is that there's these different colors. And so I think tolerance isn't enough of a word. Like, it's really like a delight in other countries and other cultures and other people, even just individuals. Like, I love meeting people and like, who are you? You know, tell me about you. Like, it's just so interesting. And so I think that that was definitely something that I was given because I lived overseas in multiple countries. You know, just seeing that diversity is genuinely one of the most wonderful things that there is.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful. I mean, for me too, and I feel like I tell this story all the time. Like when I was 5 years old, I was in Indonesia for the first time. Because obviously, a lot of people know that Aussies are obsessed with Indonesia thing. It's kind of like you guys with Mexico, I guess.
Right.
That's just what it is. And I always kind of liken it to that. But yeah, I think for me too, like seeing children my age trying to sell me bracelets so they could make a living. And when you see things like that, like some of the things that you've seen, whether it's the violence or whatever it might be, or your experiences, it does really give you that different tapestry on life and kind of how, and I think people here in the US, some of them are so ignorant to like, oh yeah, my, life in Nashville is perfect and it's the best place in the world. Like, yeah, Nashville's gorgeous, but it's not the best place in the world. Like,
there's just more.
Yeah, there's just more to it. There's more things and there's different places. And I think that, the one thing that, I always say to people is like travel is education. Like you can get education from sitting in a classroom, but you're never going to get enough education unless you travel the world.
Yeah. And that's one thing I really love about Australia. When we lived in Bali, we would go to Perth to get our visas renewed. And so we spent a ton of time in Perth and Sydney. And one of the things that I noticed so quickly about Australians were they all traveled. Like everybody did. And it was so like wonderful and refreshing to be able to have conversations with people who had been in other places. And then same with a lot of like Europeans that I know, like traveling and diverse cultures is just kind of part of what you normally do. But I guess, I don't know, the US is so huge, and I guess we only have two bordering countries, and it's expensive and whatever the reasons, but most people don't travel all that much, or if they travel, they're just going from state to state. But international travel is a lot more rare. And I think that's too bad, because I agree with you. I think it's education, it's life-changing. It gives you a different perspective. It opens up the window to your mind for things that you couldn't even really conceive of otherwise.
Yeah. And I'm sure like even for your children who like they've obviously traveled and might be different to the peers in their classroom and stuff like that. And I'm sure their perspectives are so totally different. Kind of like what yours and I would be, I guess, with some people.
Yeah, no, we've definitely seen that. I think, it's been a struggle, and it was for me too as a kid, and even now feeling like, why don't you care about the earthquake in Turkey, And I think just when you feel like you belong to the globe and not a country, it's a really different feeling. I know like when we first moved back to the US, was when there were the Australian wildfires, and my kid, I think he was in like 5th grade, like organized a fundraiser and like went to the principal, and he's like, we got to do something. I love Australia, and like we have to do this. And so like organized like a whole thing, and they did it with the school and sent money to, I don't know, some Australian charity, for like wildfire relief. But like, but that's what travel does to you. Like that's just like, that's a normal outcome, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that they did that. That's so cute.
Right? He's so
Sorry.
sweet.
Yeah, like I know you've told me that story before, but I just love that that was something that they did, especially Australia, because a lot of people when those fires were going on could not have given a care less in
Yeah.
the world. Like they're like, oh yeah, Australia is this pretty place that they see miles away. Oh, it's not affecting us, and it's like, well, it kind of is because like the pretty country that you love and would want to visit is raging wildfires and like not going to be there soon if it keeps going.
When you feel like you're a global citizen,
Yeah.
everywhere matters to you. You
Yeah.
know, like you pay attention and you care. It doesn't mean you can do something about everything. It doesn't mean you get
Right.
involved in all the things, like moderation again, but you care. Like it matters. It's real.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. It is. Do you have a favorite quote or a favorite saying that you kind of live by or it inspires you?
Okay, so I'm gonna read this to you. I came across this in Bermuda. It was on a T-shirt at an art gallery, and I just thought it was so beautiful. And I was asking the person that was there, like, do you have this in like a piece of art? And she's like, no, it's just on a T-shirt. And the T-shirt was really ugly, so I did not buy the T-shirt. But
I feel like I didn't buy it.
it was like, great T-shirt ugly. So, it says, oh, my husband's like, it was not in Bermuda, it was the Bahamas. He's right, it was in the Bahamas. Because we did a cruise to both. Anyway, so the quote says, the quality of mercy is many times born from the trembling desire to transform our pain and tragic disappointments into empathy, solidarity, forgiveness, and resurrection.
Damn. That's great.
Right?
That's powerful. Yeah. I love that. I love that. You're gonna have to send that to me so I can put that in the
I'll send you a picture of the ugly T-shirt.
the ugly T-shirt. I love you specified. No, I didn't buy the T-shirt. Just so everyone knows who's listening. She didn't.
I'm like, can I just take a picture of the quote? Like, don't like the T-shirt, like the quote.
Get it like reorganized and framed. Yeah, that's awesome. Is there a TV show or a book or a song that has inspired you in any way?
Oh man, I feel like there are so many. Um, I read a book called The Book of Longings by Sue Monk Kidd a few years ago when it came out. She's like the woman that wrote The Secret Life of Bees and like just a bunch of really like popular books. But this book is it's a novel set in the time of like Jesus's life, and it's about Jesus's wife. So it's very like edgy of her to go there. And I was listening to an interview of hers, and basically she took this book and she's like, she didn't write anything that was contradicted in the Bible. She just wrote in the silence. And it was like this really imaginative, like what if, and kind of really like engaging on Jesus as a human, like in his humanity. And anyway, like, oh my gosh, it was just gorgeously done. And I think just inspired my imagination a lot. And, you know, regardless of how you feel about Jesus, like the idea of like that type of goodness being something to model yourself after, a human that has that sort of a depth, you know, like in kindness and stuff was like, yeah, I read it every year. It's one of those for me. So that's probably one of my tops.
Okay. I love that. I always love asking that question because everybody's got so many like diverse answers. You know, some people will be like, oh, this is my favorite song. And it'll be like a random country song that inspired their life. And then, you know, you're over here talking about a book about Jesus's wife. And then like someone else will say like, oh yeah, Harry Potter inspired me. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. Like,
Yeah.
so many different perspectives, which is why I always love asking that question because I'm like, I'm never going to get the same answer.
Yeah, for sure.
Like I've never had the same answer.
And then you get a list of like songs and TV shows and movies that you need to see, books you need
But I need to, yeah. I'm like now I'm gonna add this book to my list and like add this TV show. Yeah, it's wonderful. Ooh, where to go now? Okay. Do you believe in the term leaving a legacy, or what's your take on it?
I struggle a lot with that question.
Yeah.
Because there's a part of me that's like, yeah, you know, like get her done. But I struggle a lot with that question because I've worked around victims, particularly child victims, for whom that's never going to be on the table. and for whom there's just a vacuum in their, in their existence, and they live and die in horrible situations, and the world doesn't even know who they are. And there's something in me that rebels about the whole leaving your legacy idea, because, and I'm not saying this is true, but it's how I feel.
Right. Yeah, it's your perspective.
Does that invalidate them because they can't? Is that saying my life is more meaningful because I did?
Yeah.
And I've struggled a lot with that, because there's definitely this impulse to like make my mark, do something with my life that's valuable. But then I also think like some of us, that's not how we're wired. Some of us are quieter, more close to home, have, different wants and needs and drives and gifts. And some of us don't have a choice. And so there's a really horrible story in the Bible. This might have been a good answer to your question, actually, even more than the book. There's a story in the Bible about a guy named Jephthah, who is like this warrior, and he has a daughter, and he's going to go to war. And so he makes this deal with God, like, if you let me win, I will sacrifice the first thing that comes out of my house when I come home, thinking it was going to be like an animal. Well, he comes home and his daughter like runs out, and he's like, well, guess I got to kill my kid because I made the vow. I mean, like, there's all sorts of things wrong with this anyway. And in the story, she asks her father to let her go up to the mountain with her girlfriends to like mourn the impending loss of her life. And so they go and they mourn, and then she comes back. Her dad sacrifices her to God. And then there was this like annual thing that her friends held for her in remembrance of her every year. And actually, like, I'm literally looking at a piece of art that's called Jephthah's Daughter. It's like right like behind my computer on my desk, because for me, that story, I sat with it for probably a year, because I think when you're working with victims of violence, particularly ones that don't get out, we take on the role of Jephthah's friends. Like, we can't stop this. We can't stop this. We can't prevent these horrible things. Like, not really. Do we have successful cases? Yes. And those are amazing, and we celebrate them. And it's like, you get stories in the Bible of, like Joseph, he got out, he got free, like, yay. And you have those. But then you have stories like Jephthah's daughter, where they don't get out, they don't get free, they die in horrible ways, unjust ways. And our only role is to remember them and to not let anybody forget. And so for me, I think leaving a legacy in a more deep way is not, oh, I, founded this organization and we did this good work, and like, I have my name on this thing or whatever. It's when I know that I've been a friend to people who didn't have choice, who maybe are dead now. And that in some way that they're not lost. Like, that carrying their legacy almost, I guess, in a sense, feels bigger to me, feels more meaningful to me.
I love that perspective, because it's true. It's so true. And I think that question carries not only a lot of weight, but it's different in so many regards, because when you ask it, it's like, obviously you have a family, you have children, there's, different ways that you could tackle that question. But I love the answer, because it's like, I'm not like this big, not going to be this big, shining, bright, 6 Oscars, whatever it is thing. Or maybe you are, who knows? But there's a lot to happen in the future, who knows? But I think that it's beautiful in the way that you answered that, because it's so different, and so like, yeah, it's true, and it's almost remembering them in a way and carrying on their legacy, which I think is really powerfully important. Is there anything else that you would kind of like to chat about in terms of the coalition or anti-trafficking? We've got probably about 5 or 6 more minutes, and I do have one last question.
I mean, I feel like we covered a lot of it, just, encouraging people to get involved. The cool things about networks and coalitions is there's really space for all types of people. Like when I was working in California in their task force, I think they had like 300 community volunteers, and my mother-in-law actually got involved. I was involved in anti-trafficking, and then, I don't know, I guess she got the bug. And, she was just driving people to their appointments, like she this past year threw a party for the social workers that were on the task force, just like a retreat for them. And like, she's a big party planner, event person. And so like, she threw this beautiful event. She does it every year for all the caseworkers, so they can come and get like massages and, rest and just like a retreat for a day. Like, there is something that anybody can do, and going through a coalition is a really good way to connect. So whether you're looking like locally or you want to get involved more internationally, like there's options for people. And my encouragement would be to find your coalition and network and plug in.
I love that, because I think so many people just go like, to one giant organization that they've heard about, and not to take it away from anything any of those are doing, because they're doing amazing work, and definitely organizations are helping, especially like OUR and all these different ones that have been around for a really long time. But I think that a lot of people are unfamiliar with the concept of the coalitions, and that's kind of another reason why I wanted us to talk about it today as well, because so many people are like, wait, what's a coalition? I know even when I was searching and when I found you guys and found Dark Bali, I was like, okay, it's a coalition. I was kind of like, I wasn't surprised, but I was kind of delighted, because I was like, hold on a second, that means that there's more to it, rather than just one organization.
And the cool thing is, like, in terms of the professional sector, it's touching on more and more, like when you're doing your fundraising, because you have like individual donors, and then you have, you're doing grants for projects and stuff. More and more project-based granting is requiring like some level of like networking and coalition building. Like it's becoming something that is really, really important. And so I think the future is definitely with the coalitions and networks. And it's just because if you follow the data, that's where a lot of stuff is able to get a lot of traction. So it's really, really a fun time to feel like, we've been just like ignored for so long. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh, actually, this makes a lot of sense. So
good thing to do. Yeah. It's great. And I love that people, and I'm sure there's, like you said, coalitions in every city, every state, every country, just about, that people can assist or get involved with. And I really love the perspective too on like helping with the foster kids or driving, or even what your mother-in-law is doing, like all these different things is just like really helpful, because a lot of people forget. And as I say, that a butterfly is flying past, which is a yellow butterfly, the symbol of hope, which is beautiful. But a lot of people just think that, they have to like throw money at the problem, or throw their time, or they have to join this giant task force and do all this training. And it's not the case. Sure, you can go do that if you want to, but that's not, there's much more grassroots ground ways to help and assist that creates more longevity than throwing money at a problem.
Yeah, well said.
Thank you. Okay, well, I guess that brings us to our last question. If you could sit down with anyone, past, on, or alive, and gain insight and inspiration from them, who would it be and why?
Okay, I have like a celebrity crush on Barack Obama. That's just the truth. And like, I would love to sit down with that man and ask him 1,000 questions. When he used to go to Bali a lot because he lived in Indonesia for a while. And I remember after he left the presidency, I had like a dream, and I was like crying in the dream, like, come back. And he was like in Bali, and I was like, come back. Anyway, so yeah, I think he would be a really cool person to sit down. I mean, honestly, like, I just love humans in general. So I feel like I want to talk to anybody. But I think he'd be really cool to talk to and hear about his experiences, particularly as like somebody that grew up internationally. I never really understood the man until I read a little bit about his background as a kid that grew up in multiple countries. And I'm like, oh, now he makes sense to me. Like now his perspectives, his, political decisions, like the man's a global citizen. And, how interesting to be a global citizen in charge of a specific country. So I would love to like ask him all sorts of questions about that.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't had that answer before. So I think you hit the nail on the head right there with one that wasn't covered before. So
winning.
There you go. Yeah, but I mean, it's a different perspective. I haven't read his book, but and I don't typically follow politics all that much, but I know that he grew up in a lot of different places and probably has a very unique and interesting perspective.
Yeah.
as to that's, I guess, why he ran this country that way. Who knows?
Right.
We'll see. Well, this has been absolutely delightful. I always say to everybody that I typically redo the interviews in a year from now and see what's changed, or see
Oh, fun. Yeah.
or see what's advanced. And yeah, it's just always something fun to do. So we'll do part 2 / a re-enhancement, I guess, about a year from now. And
that sounds like fun.
We'll be able to then talk about hopefully all the success of the project we're working on, and hopefully it'll be finished by then. And if not, coming out very soon to near that. So
thanks for having me. Thanks for the fun questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on.